action. I can't get no call to action, but I try, and I try, and I try, and I try.
Hello and welcome to Call to Action, the go-to podcast for anyone trying to make sense of the world of marketing and advertising. In an industry that is a minefield of utter bollocks, we aim to capture our heroes and allies from the front line to have a chinwag with. It's like Pokemon Go with the single but vital exception that it's not a short-term bandwagon of shite. It's brought to you by Gasp and I'm Giles Edwards, co-founder and MD. Today, I've caught Giles Paley-Phillips. Multi-award-winning author of children's books including The Fearsome, Beastie and Little Belle and the Moon, Giles also finds time to co-host the British Podcast Awards nominated Blank podcast with comedian Jim Daly, where recent guests have included Gary Lineker and Theroux, no less. And that's not to mention an alternative rock band career that saw him perform at the Glastonbury Festival, and TV appearances on Good Morning Britain and Eggheads. Giles says, be kind, it's a little way of showing others there is love in the world. And it's precisely that generosity of kindness I took advantage of in order to be saying, welcome to the show, Giles.
Hello. That was a very nice intro. I feel very humbled.
Oh, good. So no edit required. Right, let's go straight into our quick fire questions. So, Giles, tea or coffee?
Coffee.
Book or Facebook?
Book.
Glastonbury or Hay Festival?
Glastonbury. That was yeah. Wasn't sure about that one.
They get harder, typically. Fact or fiction?
Fiction.
Laugh or cry?
Laugh.
Heroes or monsters?
Heroes.
And lastly, Fantastic Mr. Fox or The Gruffalo?
Fantastic Mr. Fox.
Is the correct answer.
It's got to be Roald Dahl. Sorry, it's got to be Roald Dahl.
Do you have a favourite?
BFG, I think.
What did you think of the film? Have you seen it with Mark Rylance?
I liked it. Yeah, it was good. But yeah, I mean, it's always tricky when you're adapting books into movies. It's never quite as magical.
So I'm increasingly interested in how people end up doing what they do, especially as it's rarely a linear path, which I think is always encouraging to hear, especially for anyone listening who feels they can't sidestep into something entirely new. So how did it all start for you, Giles?
Well, it was certainly non-linear. I mean, if I want to go back really far, I didn't do very well at school. I kind of was never really academic. I was really interested in sports. I loved football and athletics. So I never really saw myself as being a creative if we're going to go back that far. It was always sports that I was interested in. Now, having said that, I wasn't particularly good at football. So I think even though I had dreams of becoming a professional footballer, it was never really going to be, and I think in the back of my mind, I knew it was never really going to happen. But I was okay at running, and I thought about doing running. When I left school, I thought about joining an athletics club because it was something that I enjoyed doing. And I thought it might be, it could be a possible career move. But once I got to college, I think I did the sort of thing that I kind of got shimmied along. I at school, I didn't do particularly well at school. So I thought, go to college, see if I can sort of improve myself academically. And that didn't really work out. And I kind of dropped out of college. And around the sort of time I sort of dropped out of college, I had started getting more of an influence. I mean, I'd always been into music, but I started learning the guitar. I remember watching one night, stayed up late and I think Kurt Cobain had just passed away, and I was watching like a Nirvana Unplugged thing, and I was really taken with it and really found it to be quite mesmerising. And I'd like rock music quite a lot, but I think that was kind of a bit of an epiphany that I think I want to do that. So yeah, I remember getting a guitar a few weeks later and starting to learn the guitar, and then at college I'd met a few people that were in bands and stuff, and so I got kind of closer with them and started thinking about I don't know. I never really wanted to play other people's music, and there was always a thing like you learn other people's music and you're influenced by other people. But I always kind of wanted to do my own thing. I don't know where that came from really, but just very early on learning, I wanted to write my own songs and play my own songs. So yeah, I got together with a few guys at college, and then we started a band, and that was kind of then I sort of thought was my first sort of creative pursuit. And and then it I soon became ravenous for it and wanted to. That became the thing I wanted to do. I wanted to be a musician. I wanted to play gigs, and we started to do that. We started to do shows, and you kind of get a bug for it. They were tiny little pub gigs with hardly anyone there, but that sort of performance thing became quite special, and you get a bug for it. So I started doing that kind of thing a bit more, and then we started writing together, and that became my pursuit really. I wanted to do the band, and the other guys in the band were really into it as well. So we started recording our material and trying to send it out to places, and eventually we got a management deal, and we did some really cool tours and played some really good venues, and obviously we got, what I'm talking about now into my early 20s, I got to play Glastonbury and some other big festivals. So, and that was the dream. That was the dream of doing that. But sometimes these things don't work out, and we never quite got to the level we wanted to get to. We never quite managed to get a record deal, and people in the band wanted to do other things, and that was fair enough. It's a slog being in a band, and touring around the country in a van, sleeping in the van after gigs. It's it's not pleasant always, and I guess you fall out of love with it a little bit. And so we kind of went our separate ways. I still play in a band. I still play with the drummer in the band I was in before. We still play together and write together. So that's I still have that. I still love it doing it. But I guess around sort of I got married in my early 20s, and then sort of late 20s, my wife was fell pregnant with our first child, and just again, I just don't know where it was coming from. I was working in a shop at the time, just working in a toy shop, managing a toy shop in a town near us called Lewis, and I quite enjoyed it. It was just but I was always sort of dreaming of other things, always thinking about other creative things I could be doing, and I think finding out she was pregnant and then deciding I kind of wanted to create something for our new child, and that's kind of when the writing started.
And then presumably that became as compelling and I guess addictive in some ways as the music.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, you're totally right. Yeah, it did. I started sort of looking at other, which you kind of do when you're in a band as well. You listen to other music, get influenced by things. And I started to sort of seek out stories and books, stuff that I hadn't read for years. Like we said, we talked beforehand about Roald Dahl. Finding those kind of books and getting into it and reading what was kind of out there at the time. I didn't necessarily have aspirations to get anything published, but I certainly wanted to write something that was good and compelling for and something that that he would enjoy, and it was something that we could, because I love the idea of the sort of shared experience. I still do, the shared experience of reading a bedtime story with your child, and if you've written the book as well, or the story, or you made up the story, we make up stories for our kids. There's something special about that, and I kind of wanted that. That was the sort of thing that I had in mind. So sorry, answering you, there's a long drawn out answer to your question, but yes, I did become kind of ravenous for wanting to write, and I started writing lots of stuff, and then the next stage was starting to consider whether I wanted to try and get any of them published.
Do you then subsequently see yourself now more as a writer, or do you still see yourself as a musician or a poet? I know you're a published poet. There's all sorts of strings to your bow.
Yeah, I don't know. I suppose it's just I don't see myself as any of those things. I think it's like we were saying before about imposter syndrome and feeling a little bit like, I don't know, I still feel like I'm a lost person, like I was when I was going through school and college and stuff, that I haven't really still found that thing. Although I've been very lucky, I've had work published and the podcast, whatever. It still feels like I don't feel like I can justify calling myself this, that, or the other, because it still doesn't feel real, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally makes sense. And you touched on the whole imposter syndrome feeling that you said you experienced at the podcast awards recently. It's very humble to even suggest that that's what you were feeling at the time. But I think as I concluded, it tends to be the good guys and the talented people that conclude that. So no, that's a good answer. And then in terms of what you actually write about, clearly you there's a mixture of themes that kind of come in and out of your books, but I think it's fair to say you do tackle some very serious topics and write big themes for small people, topics including death and grief and loss. What were your original and I suppose subsequent motivations for writing about these topics?
I lost my mum when I was quite young. I was 6 when I lost my mum. And obviously it's had a very profound effect on my entire life. And I think when you have children, which is also a very profound part of your life, some of those things start to come back and I would say probably haunt
Yes.
a little bit. I'll certainly say that when my youngest turned the age I was, not so much with my eldest for some reason, but I think when our youngest turned sort of 6, around the same age I was when my mum passed away, that I started to feel particularly haunted by loss. And I think I was having conversations with him about it at that time as well. You know, it was something, I know most children at a certain age, they do start to be inquisitive about loss and death, particularly if they've, you know, he would ask questions. Well, both the children have asked questions about where's your mum and dad? You know, where's your granny and grand, you know, that kind of stuff. And you do have to kind of consider how you're going to approach that subject with them. And certainly my wife and I have always been tried to be really open and honest with the children about she also lost her father when she was a teenager. So death has played a big part in both our lives, so we've always wanted to be fairly open and honest about that. And I think writing about it, like I said earlier, like having that shared experience of the bedtime story, I was hoping that for me and my children, and also maybe for other people, that the opportunity to have the conversation about those themes would be there for them in that safe environment of a bedtime story. So that's kind of why I started to write about this. And I think actually, as any creative will know, that you put a lot of yourself in all your work. So whatever you've experienced in life, there's going to be a little bit of you in what you write about, or what music you produce, or a movie you make, or wherever it might be. There will be aspects of you and your experiences will be there. So I wanted to write about those things and make it, like I say, make it a nice experience for our children to have and learn about those things in that safe environment of the bedtime story. So that's kind of why I started to write about them.
Yeah, that makes complete sense, and it's a great medium to, as you say, to tackle what is rife with complexities and understanding loss. So how do you then go about creating the characters? So a couple we've spoken of, and I've read to. My daughter Annabelle is the Fearsome Beastie, Little Bell and the Moon, Super Chimp. How do they come about? And equally, you mentioned that there's always a bit of you in your work. Are you any one of those three?
Well, The Fearsome Beastie is a book about a monster that goes and eats some kids in the local village. The twist of it is that he actually does eat the kids. So, I mean, obviously most stories you could say would be maybe a bit more PC, would actually prevent the monster from doing it. But I wanted to create like a proper Grimm Brothers style kind of story where, you know, those sort of old stories that were quite dark, you know, the original versions of Little Red Riding Hood and all those kind of stories are a lot darker than they've been watered down over the years. So I kind of wanted to write something that was more in keeping with those original kind of ideas. And it's not everyone's cup of tea, clearly, but it was nice that the publisher felt they could take a punt on that and actually allow me to write that story with a much more grisly kind of twist. I would say that the granny kind of character in that who sort of kind of saves the day. I don't want to give away the ending for anyone who's not read it, but that is definitely based on my paternal grandmother, who was a feisty northern woman who wouldn't take any crap from anyone and would be quite happy to take an axe to anyone that was like going to be like, you know, coming at the family. So certainly there is a lot of, you know, and grannies actually granny characters appear in quite a lot of my stories. There's a granny character in the Princess Stay Awake story, and also a novel I've written recently. So because I spent a lot of time with my grandparents after my mum had passed away, so you know they were always a big influence on me. So you know, and I wanted to so there's a lot of me in that respect. Peripheral characters in my life have come in, but yeah, I mean the others are just kind of, I always wanted to write a superhero story, and Super Chimp was, you know, I just thought was a funny kind of idea. Obviously Little Bell on the Moon is about grief and loss, so that's got a lot of, I mean, the idea that we, you know, return to stardust when we pass off. It's just kind of a life cycle, that story, so it's more a life lived and the experiences we have through it. So yeah, so that's kind of why that one is. But yeah, there's, you know, I wrote Princess Stay Awake, one of my books, because my son was always waking up in the middle of the night till he was 5. I know a lot of people have written to me and said, "Oh yeah, I totally get that. That's our kids always been a nightmare going to sleep." So it's it's kind of tapping into themes that are universal, but also stuff that is related to me and my experiences.
And do you have a favourite character?
Ooh, I guess the Fearsome Beastie it was my first picture book, and like I say, I don't think a lot of publishers would have put it out, and so I'm very grateful to Maverick for putting it out. And it's he's not very nice, but I kind of like him.
And then I wanted to touch on rhyme. So clearly there's a lot of rhyme throughout all of your books, and from a personal perspective, I love making up silly rhymes with my two daughters. So nonsense rhymes is part of one of your books' titles. Why is rhyme so appealing?
I think probably because of, like I said earlier, my background in music. I guess it felt like, because poetry is like music with words, really. So I think it always appealed to write in that way. And I always found reading the books I read to the children, or the books that when I was sort of looking at books that are out there when I was thinking about becoming a writer or writing stories, were the rhyming books were always the ones that appealed the most. They just are the ones that sang to me. And so it always felt like an easy thing to develop into. And I think because of the music aspect of my earlier careers. So and I just think you can be, from a creative point of view, it's fun to play with rhyme because there's lots of technical kind of aspects to it. So that's always exciting because you have to look for syllable counts, and I know some writers might think that sounds a bit boring, but I quite like that, counting syllables. So you make sure that they're all really concise. The challenges of writing a picture book as well is that you've got 32 pages, 16 spreads to tell your story. So it's you've got to be concise with the narrative, and rhyme again is another challenge to get over. And that's as a writer, that's interesting and stuff. And I just think I think it's generally there's just that appeal of the rhyme. I've always loved the work of Spike Milligan and nonsense poetry. I mean, going back to what first really spurred my first ideas of writing, when I was working in the same shop, the toy shop. I was having a day where I was trying to come up with some ideas. There was a bit of downtime, and the shop's quiet over lunchtime, and I went for a walk, and I found there's an old charity shop, and inside there was a book on the wall. It was really just doing it cheap. It was black and white, and it was a book by this author called Shel Silverstein. I'd never heard of him, but transpires that he's like Roald Dahl in America. Like everyone's heard of Shel Silverstein. If every kid's got a Shel Silverstein book, every school's got one, every library. And he writes these amazing nonsense poetry, and he'd written lyrics for Johnny Cash and all sorts of things. He was really amazing, and he did the drawings inside as well. And there's just these fantastic, short, hilarious nonsense poems. And I just remember reading through and just thinking, this is it. This is what I want. This is what I want to do. This is what I want to say. And so I remember running back to work and then writing my first story. So I think rhyme's always been a thing there, and I can't imagine not writing in rhyme, really, in some respects.
I think this is, to kind of creep a bit into our world of marketing and advertising, one of our first guests on the pod, Richard Shotton, he wrote a great piece where he actually dissected the power of rhyme, his comment being that great strap lines such as beans means Heinz and a Mars a day, etc. They're kind of underused nowadays. I think there's a tendency to people think maybe they're a bit gimmicky or it's just a bit silly, but actually because of it's silly, it's memorable. Because it's playful, it's memorable.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I find rhyme really appealing. I think one of my favourites is I think it's T.S. Eliot, the old Possum's Book of Practical Cats.
Oh, it's fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, which is great, but my two don't really enjoy it as much as I do. So.
Oh, there's a great version that Axel Scheffler did, the guy that does all the illustrations with Julia Donaldson.
Oh yeah.
For the Gruffalo and stuff. He did a version of it. So with his he illustrated it. So they might find that more appealing, is what I'm thinking. Just because it's his, have a look for it, seek it out, because I think we got it for our kids, and because they like, they're used to his kind of illustrations and the Gruffalo and Stickman and all that kind of stuff. It really appealed. So try it again.
I'll do it. I will. That's a great tip. I will. To be fair, I wasn't aware of that at all, which surprises me because most, half the bookcase is either illustrated by him or written by I think Zog's the current favourite.
Oh yeah, Zog's great.
Great stories. So the other side of writing then is reading, and you've touched on it already about that shared moment and experience of reading. How important is that? I know you worked on a recent book in partnership with Indeed, where you looked at or talked about parents who miss out on that valuable time with their children.
Oh, it's vital. It's vital, and I think the shared experience and how that is great for children to be inquisitive, to download, to talk about what's going on in their lives. It can open up all sorts of discussions. Plus, they're getting to hear a great story, spark their imaginations. So there's all sorts of benefits to the shared experience of reading. Also, reading as an individual. I mean, people always, when I go into schools or if I'm doing creative writing workshops or anything, I always say about the benefit of reading. If you are wanting to be a writer or a creative, and how important reading is for that, because, it's really good to learn the craft, to see other ideas, be inspired. You won't find many musicians that don't listen to other music. You don't find many movie filmmakers that aren't watching other films. And I think sometimes you don't always hear about writers reading, and it's so important to get that, to be inspired by other people's work. And I think if you're starting out as a writer or a poet or a novelist, wherever it might be, reading is so invaluable. And like I say, I say that a lot when I go and do school visits and do talks about writing, that how important it is. And I think I didn't read a lot when I was a kid, definitely not, and I'm trying to make up for it a bit now as an adult, both reading with the children and reading for my own pleasure. And it's not always easy to read, if some people find it more easy, and it's much easier now to stick on a screen. We've got screens everywhere, and if I was going to choose my mode of relaxation, it would be sticking on Netflix or whatever. But at the same time, I think it's so vital that we do read and learn about language and literature and whatever you're into. But yeah, I just think it's just a thing that we should never lose, and we need to keep hold of it for as long as possible.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So what are you currently working on, Giles? You're currently writing.
So I finished the sort of butt end of, I finished it about a year ago, I suppose, was a book for adults, which is a verse novel, which is coming out at the end of this year, called 152 Days, which is a sort of semi-biographical story, a bit about what I was saying earlier about losing my mum when I was young, and kind of the fallout from that.
Okay.
And that's coming out with Unbound at the end of this year. So I'm excited about that. But off the back of that, I've written a couple of other novels in the same style. So it's in free verse. So kind of a sort of, a step on from the sort of rhythm and rhyme of writing a children's book. So I wanted to write these stories where the language was the main propeller of the story, and not plot, and not, so it's about the language of the words, and using that as the narrative frame, and not just a prose plot. So it's been really really lovely experience writing like that, and because it's it's quite, because it's free verse, you're not constricted to a certain iambic pentameter kind of thing, so it's a freeing experience, and I really enjoy writing that way. So so I've written a couple of other adult novels. One is a sort of thriller, and the other one is kind of a sci-fi thing. So I'm kind of working on those still at the moment because they need tweaking. But so that's kind of what I've been working on generally, and a few other picture book ideas. But yeah, I've been quite busy with sort of other projects,
and obviously the pod, which we'll come on to in a second. You mentioned your 152 days is actually being published by Unbound. So does that mean people listening to this can still get involved with the fundraising side of that?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting model, the Unbound thing. So to take you back a bit, the story's, obviously I've already explained, is written in free verse. It's a dark personal story from the point of view of a teenager protagonist who in the book has got no name, he's unnamed. I gave it to my agent, and she said, straight off the bat, she was like, it's a beautiful book, you've really well written, but bear in mind, this might be very tricky to place anywhere. So she said, we're going to have to try and find an editor who's super loves it, who's going to be so behind it that their sales teams in the publisher are going to fawn over it. Okay, so it's really, so she says it's going to be a really hard sell because it's quite niche. So I said, okay, let's see how we get on. So we started sending it out. She started sending it out to various publishers, and the feedback we got was amazing. We got loads of really good feedback, and it was really sort of validation for the story. I thought, this is great. I wasn't sure how people would receive it. It's always tricky when you send stuff out to editors, even via an agent. They can often be quite cold. You don't get, you get cold response, or you don't get any response. You don't get any feedback. And, I keep getting this really wonderful feedback each time. But each time was the same issue. We don't think that we can sell this book. It's too personal. It's too dark. Free verse is too niche, et cetera, et cetera. So we kind of keep hitting brick walls. And, it's one of those things where we were sort of, my agent Becky was, she was so supportive about it and brilliant. And she said, we're going to find a way somehow to get this out there. But at the moment, I don't know, we might need to wait. We might have to wait till the industry comes around to more of these kind of books. And we might have to wait, you might have to leave it for a couple of years and see where the land lies and, whatever. And then we came across Unbound, who have an interesting model. So basically they're like a regular publisher, but what they do is they want to give the power of the book or what books are published back to the reader. So basically if you want to read this book, then you pre-order it, and then if enough people pre-order the book, then it goes into production. So you're giving readers the power to decide whether they want to read this book or not. And so it's a really interesting model. And so it works like a pledge. It's kind of like a crowdfunding kind of thing, but there's no time limit on it. And books, it can take years sometimes for books to be fully funded. I was really lucky. My book got funded really quickly, and I have I'm really hugely grateful to everyone that pledged and got involved and wanted to read the book. And it was really lovely, and again, another humbling experience really to be involved in that process. And then as soon as you've hit that sort of watermark, you are into just regular. You're like a regular publisher, and you work with an editor and a copy editor and line editor, and then you go for a design team, and it's that collaborative process as you would have with any publisher. So it's been a really, really wonderful experience for me, the whole sort of thing really. And they're a brilliant publisher, and I'm really grateful that they decided to take on this project. Again, like other publishers, they don't take on every project. They only take on ones they think are viable. So it was nice that they were willing to take a punt on this book, and obviously saw some merit in it, and and it's going to be published now. So in answer to your question, people can still pre-order their copies, and you get your name in the book. So you get a special copy of the book with your name in it, and a thank you, and you get a special version of the book, so it's printed, so you get like a more plush version of it, or you can have a signed copy and all these different things. So you just go to the Unbound, so I think it's unbound.com, and then you can just type in my name in the search bar, and then it will come up 152 days. And you can get an ebook for £10, and then they go up to sort of £25 for a kind of signed hardback. So
Great. We'll put that link in the episode page for this, so that people can go over and support
Thank you.
And as you say, it's great that Unbound have supported this and shown you that faith, and echo what you said. They do have a great, very democratic model for writers. And in fact, we've had 2 previous guests have had works published using Unbound, both Amy Keane and Stephen Colgan.
Oh, cool.
So the fruits of their labour are wonderful and should be enjoyed. So so there's a nod to Unbound.
Yeah, and
there.
Actually, there are a lot of more bigger mainstream people are using it now. Quite a few celebrities have started writing books through Unbound, and I mean they've got Terry Jones from Monty Python has done a couple of books with them. Raymond Briggs, the Snowman author's done a book with them. Kip DeWall, who's a massive, so it's becoming, Tom Cox, who's a massive nature writer, who's been a Times bestseller, has done 3 or 4 books with them now. So it's really, really interesting how they're actually, you're getting some really big name names in the industry that are wanting to publish books for Unbound, and that's really exciting. It's exciting to be involved with them. So yeah, it's great.
Excellent. We've mentioned the podcast a couple of times. So the podcast is called Blank. You were recently, as we said on the intro, nominated in the British Podcast Award, and the subject for the podcast is essentially, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's looking into those moments when we go blank, and that applies to everyone from writers to I don't know, me asking this very question or presenting or just forgetting lines for actors. So firstly, how did you arrive at such a great subject for the podcast? Again, was that maybe inspired by personal experience? And secondly, what makes a good podcast? Because I could do with some tips.
I'll address your second question first. I don't know, to be honest, what about the podcast. I mean, we're still so fresh and new to it. I mean, Jim, who I co-host with, is a stand-up, and he does a lot of presenting and stuff anyway. He does so we met sort of via Twitter because we're both Crystal Palace fans.
Yes.
And he does a Crystal Palace podcast called FYP, which is very successful. And I think I sort of pitched him the idea of doing Blank, and so obviously he had some experience of podcasting anyway. I have no experience of podcasting. I have no experience of being a broadcaster or presenter. I had no experience of doing any of those stuff. So I am totally winging every week.
That imposter syndrome again.
Totally. And obviously you get, and get starstruck quite a lot of the time as well. So it's, So in regards to knowing what works best, I guess from a technical point of view is making sure that you have got decent gear, and then I think social media, make sure that you make your presence felt on those kind of platforms, and just making sure you get people to tell their friends and family about it, and subscribe. That's all I can really sort of suggest on that sort of front. We're like everybody else. I think there's so many podcasts now, and standing out from the crowd is always difficult in a very thick forest of podcasts. I think we said when we started, if we get like 2 or 3 people listening, that's great. So that it, and at the end of the day, it's the making it that is the most important thing to us. The actual process of being in the room with our guest and having that conversation is the exciting bit, and and if people listen to it, then that's a huge bonus. So your first question was, how did it come about? So, well, I've been wanting to make a podcast for about 12 years. So a lot of things happened at this toy shop when I was working at a toy shop. So I got made redundant from the toy shop. The band had broken up. I was just getting into writing, and I started listening to, I think I'd got my first iPod. They'd only just started coming out. And I started listening to Ricky Gervais Show, which was probably like the first kind of podcast that a lot of people listen to, with Carl Pilkington and Stephen Merchant. And I worked with a lady who was quite eccentric, and she was like my Carl Pilkington. And if anyone remembers the Ricky Gervais Show, Carl Pilkington is the sort of it's just them sort of ripping him a lot because of his sort of strange ideas about the world. And she had all these weird, wonderful ideas of the world. So I started to record her. I'd ask her questions, and then we'd go. And that was kind of what I started doing. And then I obviously didn't do anything with it. And then, it was one of those things where I think I wrote a list of like a bucket list when I got made redundant. I was like, what are the things I want to do? And one of them was I wanted to write some books. I wanted to learn the piano, which I haven't done yet. I wanted to do a podcast. And I kind of put it to one side and thought, well, I'm not ready. I don't have any experience. I don't have any contacts. I kind of like the idea of doing an interview podcast, but didn't, like I say, I didn't have anything. Didn't have the requisite skills or knowledge or anything for it at that point. Skip on sort of 10, 12 years later, I started being asked to be on a few podcasts. And I thought, I do like the medium. I listen to a lot of podcasts. I think back. I was thinking back to that list I'd made and like things I wanted to do. I had a similar situation where I was sort of downtime in work. I didn't have much work going in. I thought, this is, going through a slight blank moment writing wise. Thinking that I'd always wanted to write kind of wanted to do a podcast and do something about creativity, because that's what the creative industries are what I'm in. And just literally one day I just thought, okay, I'm quite an impetuous person, so do tend to, like, if I kind of got like a feeling about something, I will go and seek it out. And so I said to my wife, I'm going to make a podcast. She was like, okay. And I said, I'm going to see if so-and-so will come on it. And so I started asking, I've been very lucky that over the last few years, I've built up a bit of a following on Twitter, and I've got a few well-known people that follow me, and I started to sort of have conversations with them, in direct messaging and stuff like that. So I started just putting the feelers out. Would you come on my podcast? It's good. I want it to be about this. You're a creative, or you're, whatever it might be. And people started saying yes, which is obviously the first thing that was a bit of a surprise. I thought, okay, they seem to like the idea of the sort of, these difficult moments. And I guess podcasts are a way for people to open up a bit more. They're not selling anything particularly. It's not like, you're going on, a BBC program or Graham Norton or wherever it is to sell a product or a film or a TV program that you're in, or whatever it might be. So, the idea of long form podcasts being, a safe place where people can talk about, your chat, this, that kind of, have that kind of more open discussion was obviously appealing to some people. So that's how it kind of came about. And then I contacted Jim and said, look, I'm doing this. This is the idea. It'd be great to have you on board. I like what you do with your podcast. You've got, I think we get on, we've got similar interests. I think, we hadn't met each other at that point. So we met up in Brighton. Instantly there was, there's a chemistry between us, and we were on the same page about general things in life. We've got very similar outlooks, and kind of knew straight away that it could work well, the two of us. I wanted to do a long form interview podcast with three voices in the room rather than just the two, which a lot of, quite a lot of interview podcasts are Frostniks, and that's fine to have that. It's great. There's some really great ones, and some of my favorites are just, like Adam Buxton's for just on the top of my head is great because it's just him and the guest, and that's really great. But we wanted to kind of have, like, an extra voice in there that, Jim and I could bounce the idea. And I like the idea of collaborating anyway. I've always really enjoyed collaboration, being in a band and stuff. So, I quite like that idea. And actually, a lot of people sort of see writing as a very singular activity. Once you get in with a publisher, it is a very collaborative project. So, I like collaboration. That's always been interesting to me. So that's how it kind of came about. And, and it's been a complete whirlwind. I mean, we started in September, and, people keep saying yes to coming on, and we keep pinching ourselves that we sit down each week with some of our heroes. I mean, I just, like I say, it's just kind of surreal sometimes, and it's been an absolute blast, and I've really loved every single second of it, and I love every aspect of it. I mean, Jim and I both put the show together in post, so sometimes Jim will edit one. We tend not to edit. We actually don't edit the conversations. They're very clear as they are. So I think we said when we first started that we would leave blank moments in, because we feel like it's more natural. The idea is that it's three people having a chat over a cup of tea, a cup of coffee. It's and everyone else is kind of flies on the wall. It's we want it to make it as natural as possible. So we leave in blank moments that come up. If we get something wrong or we say something wrong, it's left in there. I mean, the first episode we interviewed John Ronson, who I'm a massive fan of, and I was a bit nervous about meeting him. No, I was very nervous about meeting him. And we met him at his hotel, and we did the interview in his hotel, and I'd really thought out what I was going to say to him as the first question. Not that we particularly have questions as such, but we have little bullet points that we try and get to. And I'd really thought about it loads on the train up to London, and I'd been going over it in my head. And then when I said it, I got the name of his book wrong. And it was so crushing. I was mortified. And he corrected me. He was very nice about it. But I thought, balls. It was, so that was, but we I was thinking, we could, and I was thinking, no, do you know what? We're leaving that in, because that's part of it. We all have those moments. And I think that's why people are enjoying it, and why people want to come on it, is that we do all have those blank moments, those, whatever it might be, in a conversation or through your work stream, or you can't come up with content, or you we've tried to throw the net out with regards to our guests. So we've had politicians on, we've had sports people, because all these different all these blank moments happen for everybody. It could be that you're having a loss of form. We spoke to Gary Neville and Gary Lineker about dips in form when they were playing, or comedians. We talked to them about losing crowds if they're performing live, or a politician like Caroline Lucas saying that the first time she stood up in Parliament, she completely forgot what she was going to say. So there's all these kind of things, that I think touch so many different people in so many different sectors or industries that it's quite nice for us to be able to throw the net out and get as many different voices as we can to talk to. So
yeah, and it's revealing, isn't it?
It is revealing. That was a very long answer to your question.
No, it's good. I like long answers, but it's revealing and also reassuring to know that it's a common thing faced by people in all walks of life.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. I think when possibly a thing that's great about podcasts is that we can find something that we're empathetic with. So, if you're into football, the thing about podcasts is you can seek out a particular thing, and and I hope people will seek us out for that reason, that they can empathise with those moments, and also we sit down with people that are top of their game. We're talking to people that are the biggest presenter on the BBC in Gary Lineker. You've got Louis Theroux, the most respected documentarian in England today. You've got people that are really rich at the top of their game, and they still have those moments, and they still have those neuroses about various things. They still want to be better or seek something, whatever it might be, and that is so reassuring. As Jim and I, who are nobodies really, to hear. I like to think that we are like the listeners on, we're the everybody's who are listening to these impressive people who have such impressive careers, and know that they have them just as much, even though they're incredibly successful.
Listening to the episode with Gary Lineker that you just mentioned, it was interesting to hear him say that when he first started broadcasting and presenting, that his own opinion of himself was that he was absolutely terrible. I mean, I'm paraphrasing. He probably didn't say he was terrible, but he gave the impression that he's been on a road of improvement when it comes to him now. And when you look at him now and see him present, he's very much in that whole Des Lynam category of this guy's just spot on.
Yeah, and he talked about having media training, and also, I think he said he did media training with Trevor Brooking. I think so.
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
Clearly, it's paid off. He's brilliant at what he does now, and he's very relaxed in front of the camera. He had to work at it, and I think that's nice to hear as well. It wasn't just he just didn't fall into the and actually had a passion for learning about it as well. He had a drive to do it. He wanted to work in the media, and it's paid dividends for him. So yes, it's cool.
I'd like to ask you a couple of listener questions, if I may. So, asking the general public for their opinion, be it on Brexit or boat names, is notoriously fraught with danger. But we've had a couple in. So, Louise has asked, given your career history, and I must just add some context here, she's referencing to your work in marketing and social media, which we haven't actually touched on. But Louise asks, is it easier to write for brands or for children?
Oh, goodness. Probably brands, because you normally get a brief. Very rarely a brief when you're writing stuff for kids. You just got to kind of hope that they're going to like it. And actually, I think kids are more brutal in their honesty than brands are. So I'd have to go brands being easier. Although, no writing's easy.
No. This is true. I often think of writing for brands. So if you park that as the copywriter title, it's a bit like acting, isn't it? You have to take on a part and take on a different voice. Whereas writing for children, it's obviously a lot broader, the options.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And you just don't know what they're going to like and what they're not going to like.
No. Welcome to parenthood, everyone out there.
Yeah.
So our own copywriter here, Mark, he has asked, for my 39th birthday, I was bought a £175 limited edition Lego Star Wars Y-Wing spaceship. As a master of mental health and also a fellow Lego lover, do I have a problem? No,
Lego. Do you know what? So when the kids got old enough for Lego, it was just floodgates open. This is like, okay, now we can invest in some really good Lego. So yeah, I am a bit of obsessed with Lego. Because last week they put out that they're bringing out a Stranger Things set.
Are they?
Yeah.
Nice.
So you get it's really cool because you get like the house and then you get the upside down. So it's like you can flip it up, and I literally creamed my pants when I saw that because I have to own it. I really have to own that. Although it is £179, which does seem a little bit steep.
Yeah, but they know you're going to buy it, Giles.
That's the only thing with Lego.
Well, they know now anyway.
Oh no, well, I'm going to have to ask a few friends to chip in, I think. But it's the thing I love about Lego, again, in all seriousness, is going back to that shared experience. I think the reason I really got into it was the fact that I could do it with the children. So we would create, we'd make the sets together, and we'd play with them together and stuff like that. And obviously, like Lego's got a sort of the geek value for adults. Taking you back to those times when you had it when you were a kid. I think it's that shared experience that I love about it. So yeah, I mean, I've got loads and loads of my own sets. I'm saying inverted commas, but yeah, I mean, the kids still love it. So, but anyway, no, I don't think he's got a problem at all. I hope you enjoy building it.
Yeah, well, I'll let him know as soon as we finish this episode. He's only next door, and he'll be relieved to know that you feel he's in a good place.
I think he's in a very good place.
He is, yeah. Well, he is, yeah. So the final part of the interview, Giles, is we ask our 4 pertinent posers. So these are our usual questions.
Right.
Number 1 is, what advice would you give to your younger self?
What would I give my younger self? That's a really tricky question to ask. Don't fret too much. Things will generally be all right. I'd probably tell my younger self not to fret too much. Things normally work out okay. Just maybe be a bit more chilled out. I'm not like I can be a chilled out person, but yeah, I think that's what I would say to my younger person.
It's come up a couple of times, actually. I think, again, when you start off in life, or whether you want to focus this on work and you start off in a career, it's natural to feel anxious and to worry about things. But again, just nodding back to a previous guest, JP Hansen, I recall him saying that you worry so much that it's the end of the world when you make a mistake.
Yeah.
And to date, it never has been.
No, and I think when things have happened in my life that have gone badly, like, bands, being obsessed with being a musician and the band splitting up, doing this, whatever it might be, you become a bit of a doom monger, and you just, you think this is, like you say, the end of the world. Oh, this is, I'm never going to do this, that, and the other. But actually, things normally work out right. And actually, would I want to be doing that thing now? And probably, I would say to myself, and probably not.
Good stuff. Number 2. So number 2 is, if you could banish one thing from the industry, what would it be and why? So when we refer to industry, depending on our guests, that can be many things, but we obviously will extend that to the publishing world. I
think being ignored. I've talked about this with other people in other industries, actually, other creative industries, and a lot of people get ignored. I know I've got actor friends who will go for auditions and just won't hear anything. And I think it's that. I think we'd rather the rejection. Yeah. I think for a lot of creatives, they want closure. So I think, if a book's gone out for, to an editor or whatever, or I ask someone to be on the podcast or wherever it might be, it's being ignored is the painful bit. You could say you're being ghosted. I guess that's the kind of in word, isn't it? But just, one thing that I've talked to a lot of people about is that being ignored thing and how painful that can be. And actually being rejected is not as painful. So I would say, to any editors out there, to any casting directors, to any A&R people, please just tell the people that you don't want to use them, or you don't want to put their record out, or you don't want to put their book out, because keeping them hanging is far worse.
Yeah, and equally, whilst they're hanging, they can speculate that the reasons they haven't heard back are far worse than the truth.
Exactly.
Which doesn't help, does it? I mean, there's parallels there with our world of pitching and not hearing back from a client, which again is sadly very common in our industry.
Well, it happens all over the job. When you go for a job or anything now, it just seems to be like there's a culture. You say, "Oh, I just won't bother telling them," and I just think, well, that just feels unfair and I guess rude as well. I think people will take it a lot better if you just tell them. I know it's maybe it's easier for people to ignore people, but anyway. That's a little gripe I have.
Yeah, no, I share that same gripe. I mean, I think people can be so discourteous without intending to be so. We, much like many agencies out there, we receive frequent email job requests from mostly young grads, and we will always respond to every single one, even if, as you say, it is it's never a rejection. It's often a we're not, no, but keep your chin up, or try here, or whatever. And it's amazing how many people reply again to say thank you for getting back to me, because no one else has. And I'm not trying to say, ooh, aren't we great? But I think it's true. It doesn't take long to reply, and
it doesn't. Yeah,
and that being ignored is a horrible feeling. So
it is.
Any books that you would recommend? So I expect there to be a few. We'll link to all of your books, by the way,
that's very kind.
These. So, are there any in particular that you would recommend to our listeners?
Well, I think for anyone in this kind of time of toxicity on social media, I can heartily recommend John Monson's book, So You've Been Publicly Shamed, which is just a genuinely brilliant book about social media pile-ins and being chastised rather from society because you wrote a silly tweet or you had an opinion on something. So I would heartily recommend that. I've been watching Game of Thrones, right?
We can talk about that afterwards as well, actually.
And so I'm trying to plan through the books because I'm not entirely not entirely happy with the ending.
I'm standing next to you.
Yeah. So I'm reading the books of that, which are brilliant. And what else have I read recently? I mean, I've been reading Russell Brand's book Mentors, which is good. Yeah, I know for some people Russell Brand's a bit Marmite, but I've come to really appreciate him over the last few years. I never used to sort of like him that much, but I really I dig what he's doing these days, and his podcast is great. And I like the 2019 Russell Brand a lot.
Yeah.
And his book Mentors is great. Actually, it's all about sort of people that have had a big influence on his life and inspired him. So that's great. And the last one I would say is Waiting on the Punch, which is a book by Mark Maron, who does the W2F podcast, and it's all extracts from his podcast with various different well-known guests. That's great. As a podcast book, it's great to, as a podcaster now, which seems weird saying that. It's great to sort of see some of his interview techniques and stuff. You can kind of draw from the. So that's great. That's a great book. So yeah, well worth reading.
Lastly, we always dedicate every show to someone, and we bestow or hospital pass that honour, depending on your view, to our guest, who has to give their reason why. So over to you, Giles.
So, dedication. Well, I'd normally dedicate most things to my wife and kids, just because they're always there for me, no matter what. I know it seems a bit schmoozy at the end there, but that's who I will dedicate to, because they're just they're everything to me. So so it's to them.
Good, that's great. Well, it's hard to argue with that, Giles. So thank you. As a final call to action, then everyone listening should head over to calltoaction.co, where you've shared links to everything discussed in the last hour, including the book recommendations, including Unbound, and including Giles's fantastic podcast that he co-hosts, Blank. How else can we all get more Giles Paley-Phillips? Yeah,
you can find me on social media. I'm on Twitter at EliIsTender10. So it's EliIsTender10, and the same for Instagram, and just look my name up on Facebook. But yeah, please do come and have a chat. I'm always up for a chat. I do actually follow most people back. I don't know, I started doing this when I first joined Twitter. I don't think I quite knew how it worked, and ended up just doing a Facebook thing and following everyone back. So I follow loads of people, but I kind of like it. I think it means my timeline is always very interesting.
Okay, fantastic. Well, we'll link to your social medias too. So, thank you so much for joining us, Giles. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you. Finally, our paths have crossed a few times on social, but we had been yet to talk. So, thank you for finding time to talk to us.
No, thank you so much for having me on. It's been a pleasure.
And finally, thank you to everyone who continues to listen and support the show. Please continue to get in touch with questions to put to future guests, feedback, and anything else you want to share. Simply email us at hello@calltoaction.co.
I can't get no call to action. I can't get no call to action, but I try and I try and I try and I try.